Listen close. This one's gonna pull at every string in your chest. A love so powerful it felt like defying God himself, born in the wild, lonesome heart of the American West, where mountains stand guard and old wounds bleed fresh every winter. That's the kind of place where destiny doesn't whisper. It roars. It started on a gray November day with a simple, desperate act. A lonely widow raising an axe she couldn't swing right, and a man stepping silently from the trees to take it from her hands. One moment of kindness in a cruel world, one spark in the freezing air, and from there a fire grew that would either warm them through every storm or burn everything they'd ever known to ash. If your pulse is already picking up, hit that like button and tell me in the comments, where in this big wild country are you hearing this story tonight? New Mexico territory, 1875. Chopping firewood ought to have been straightforward work, but Sophronia Quill knew better as she hefted the axe high over the stubborn log for what felt like the 10th miserable swing that afternoon. Her arms shook from the strain, each cold breath scorching her lungs like fire. 5 long winters alone in this rough-hewn cabin, and the simplest chores of staying alive still defeated her. She dragged the back of her hand across her forehead, tugging the wool shawl tighter around her shoulders against the bite of the wind. The northern New Mexico mountains rose silent and massive all around her, stunning in their wild beauty, yet utterly uncaring about one woman's fight to get by. Overhead, the November sky pressed down heavy and slate gray, heavy with the promise of snow by dark. "One more swing," she muttered under her breath, her own voice sounding foreign after so many days without another soul to hear it. She lifted the axe again, and uninvited memories of Hezekiah Grimm slipped into her thoughts. Her husband had been dead 2 years now, carried off by typhoid fever somewhere on the long trade roads to Santa Fe. They'd shared 5 years of marriage before that, though marriage felt too warm a word for the quiet arrangement they'd lived. Roommates, maybe, silent partners in a life that gave neither of them much warmth. Hezekiah had been almost 20 years older when their families arranged the match. A prosperous merchant looking for a young woman to keep his house tidy while he rode the trails. Sophronia had been 19. Her own family's money running thin, her old dream of teaching school traded away for the promise of respectability and a roof. What followed was 5 years of careful, polite distance. Hezekiah wasn't mean, just far away in his heart. His real fire burned for account books and deals, not for the young wife waiting back home. Their wedding night had been quick and clumsy, the same pattern repeating in the few times they came together afterward. When he was home, they shared the same rooms, but never truly shared a life, like 2 courteous strangers sharing space in a boarding house. Now, 2 years a widow, Sophronia sometimes wondered whether she truly grieved the man himself or only the steady routine his presence had once provided. The small monthly payments from his old business partners still came, but they never stretched far enough. The cabin's isolation, once a quiet relief from wifely expectations, had slowly turned into a cage of endless silence. The axe came down hard, missing the heart of the log again, skidding off to one side. Sophronia let the tool fall with a sharp cry of pure frustration, hot tears pricking her eyes from cold and defeat alike. "What would Ma say if she could see me now?" she whispered. Her folks were only 2 days' ride away in the little settlement of Cimarron, forever urging her to give up this lonely life and come home to them. Yet something stubborn held her here. Maybe pride, maybe the fierce hope that she could still carve out a life on her own terms. Lost in that thought, she almost missed the sudden change in the air. A feeling, like eyes on her back. She turned slowly, heart slamming against her ribs, and there he stood. A stranger at the edge of the clearing, tall and motionless as the ponderosa pines ringing the cabin. Long dark hair spilled past his shoulders, a single eagle feather tied into it. Sharp cheekbones framed eyes that took in everything and gave nothing away. The buckskin he wore, the calm certainty in the way he stood, told her instantly what Hezekiah had drilled into her to fear. An Apache. Sophronia froze, her mind racing through every blood-chilling tale told around campfires in the settlements, stories of raids and stolen women Hezekiah had used to explain why he kept her tucked so far from anywhere. But this man carried no rifle, no visible blade, and his stance stayed easy, almost careful. For what felt like forever, they simply looked at each other, a lone white woman in the high country, and an Apache warrior a long way from his own people's lands, both of them surprised by the other. Then, moving with slow, deliberate care so as not to startle her, he nodded towards the axe lying at her feet. The meaning was plain even without words. Every instinct screamed she should be terrified, should bolt inside, bar the door, grab the old shotgun. Instead, something in those steady eyes, maybe a quiet dignity, maybe simply the lack of threat she'd been taught to expect, made her pause. I can handle it, she said, though the scattered split pieces all around her told the plain truth. A faint, fleeting smile ghosted across his mouth. He took one careful step closer, then stopped, waiting. When she didn't back away, he closed the distance with measured strides until he stood right in front of her. Up close, she could see the faint lines at the corners of his eyes. He was older than she'd first guessed, probably early 30s, not far from her own 26 years. He held out his hand, palm up, and tipped his head toward the axe again. Sophronia felt the weight of the moment settle on her shoulders. Every story, every warning she'd ever heard about the world beyond these mountains told her this man was danger. Yet here, in the snowy clearing with flakes already drifting down, those old fears felt like they belonged to somebody else's life. She bent, picked up the axe, hesitated one heartbeat, then laid it handle first into his open palm. His fingers brushed hers, warm despite the freezing air, and a strange spark raced up her arm. He gave one short nod of thanks, then turned to the woodpile. With smooth, practiced grace, he set a log in place, swung the axe in one clean, perfect arc, and the wood split straight down the middle with a crack that rang through the trees like rifle fire. In minutes, the whole messy pile was transformed, neat, even splits stacked ready for the fire, each piece proof of the strength and skill she could never quite master. Sophronia watched, caught, almost spellbound by how little effort it seemed to take him. There was nothing showy about it, no wasted motion, just the quiet certainty of a man who'd spent his life learning to live with this hard, unforgiving land. As he worked, she noticed the small things, the careful beadwork stitching his moccasins, the worn leather sheath at his belt holding a knife, the thin red cord wrapping a lock of hair that held the eagle feather against his temple. When the last log lay neatly split, Itzachu Thorn gathered a solid armload of firewood and glanced toward the cabin, his dark eyes asking the silent question. Sophronia gave a small nod and started toward the porch, showing him where to stack the wood against the wall, where the overhang would keep the steadily falling snow from burying it. They worked side by side without a word, carrying load after load through the thickening flakes. Every time his attention was on the task, Sophronia stole glances at him, watching the sure, economical way his hands moved, how the snowflakes vanished the instant they touched the warmth of his skin, the respectful space he always kept between them, as though he could sense the fear she hadn't yet spoken aloud. When the final piece was placed, he turned the axe and offered it back to her, handle first. Their eyes locked. For one wild heartbeat, Sophronia felt the urge to ask him to stay, just to fill the crushing quiet that had been her only company for far too long. "Thank you," was all she managed, the two words far too small for the tangle of gratitude and curiosity swirling inside her. "I'm Sophronia." He studied her for a long moment, as though weighing whether words were worth the risk. Then he spoke, his voice low, carrying the faint cadence of another tongue but clear in English. "It's a true thorn," he said, pressing a hand briefly to his chest. "It's a true thorn," she repeated slowly, tasting the strange syllables. He dipped his chin once more, then stepped back, ready to melt back into the storm the same way he had appeared. But before he turned fully away, his gaze held on her face with a quiet force that stole her breath. "Storm's coming harder," he said, lifting his eyes to the darkening sky. "You've got wood now. Keep warm." With that, he was gone, swallowed by the swirling white, leaving Sophronia standing on the porch, gripping the axe, heart pounding, half convinced the whole encounter had been a desperate trick her lonely mind had played on her. That night, the wind screamed around the cabin corners while the fire snapped and hissed in the hearth. Sophronia's thoughts kept drifting back to It's a True Thorn, to the simple kindness from a man she'd been raised to dread, to the odd, fluttering warmth that had sparked when their fingers brushed. She reached for the worn journal on the shelf, lit a fresh candle, and began to write, setting down every detail before the memory could slip away. As the pen scratched across the page, a quiet truth settled over her. For the first time in years, she felt awake, really awake, inside her own life. Outside, the blizzard roared on, burying the mountains under a deep white shroud that would remake the whole world by morning. Inside, something just as powerful had begun to stir, though Sophronia wasn't ready to name it yet. Dawn broke sharp and brilliant, the world glittering under a fresh layer of snow. Sophronia rose before first light, bundled herself in every warm layer she owned, and stepped onto the porch. The sun struck the snow so fiercely her eyes watered, but she refused to go back inside. After days trapped by the storm, the wide, wild beauty of the mountains felt like a hand reaching out, urging her to breathe deeper, to really see. She moved carefully down the steps, boots crunching through the crust. The woodpile stood proud and orderly. Proof yesterday hadn't been a dream. She trailed her fingers along the even rows, remembering the swift certainty of It's a True Thorn's hands. That memory steadied her. She fetched the axe, walked to a downed pine at the clearing's edge, planted her feet the way she'd watched him do, lifted the blade, and swung. The edge bit deep, not perfect, but solid. One more swing and the log cracked open. "I did it," she whispered. A smile broke across her face, small, but hers alone. All through the day, melting snow for water, feeding the fire, cooking a plain supper, Sophronia caught herself glancing towards the tree line. She told herself it was only caution, sensible after a stranger had walked right up to her door. But each time her eyes lingered on the exact place where It's a True Thorn had vanished into the pines, she knew the truth. She was hoping he'd come back. The notion should have scared her. 5 years married to Hezekiah. Grimm had taught her men offered little beyond duty. 2 years widowed had shown her the unexpected freedom of being alone. Yet something about this quiet Apache had stirred a curiosity she'd believed long buried. As evening fell and twilight crept over the ridges, Sophronia sat close to the fire with one of the few books Hezekiah had left behind. A worn volume of poetry she knew almost by heart. The familiar lines usually soothed her. Tonight they couldn't hold her attention. Her mind kept returning to the man who had split her wood and disappeared, leaving only questions behind. The temperature plunged as night deepened. Cold seeped through the cabin logs despite the blaze. Sophronia added another thick piece of wood, silently thankful for the full stack, and pulled her mother's wedding quilt tighter around her shoulders. She had just settled back into the chair when a faint sound outside stopped her cold. The soft, deliberate crunch of boots on snow. Heart slamming, she set the book aside and edged to the window. Moonlight poured silver across the clearing, bright enough to show every detail. Yet she saw nothing but untouched white. Had she imagined it? Was the loneliness finally playing cruel games with her ears? She started to turn away. Then a shadow shifted at the far edge of the trees. A heartbeat later, Itzachu Thorn stepped fully into the moonlight, a dark silhouette against the shining snow. Across his shoulders lay the fresh carcass of a deer. Sophronia's breath snagged in her throat. He had come back. Without thinking, she crossed the room, threw open the door. Icy air rushed in, warring with the fire's heat. Their eyes met across the frozen yard. For a long second, neither moved. Then Itzachu Thorn started toward her, walking with that same careful, measured stride, footsteps almost silent even under the weight he carried. As Itzachu Thorn drew nearer the cabin, Sophronia stepped to one side without a word, offering the open doorway like an unspoken welcome. He dipped his head in quiet thanks and ducked inside, carrying the sharp scent of pine needles and the crisp bite of night air. The little cabin felt suddenly smaller with him in it, every corner sharper, reminding her how long it had been since another living soul had crossed her threshold. "You came back," she said, the words hanging somewhere between question and wonder. Itzachu gave a single nod, easing the deer's carcass to the floorboards near the door with careful strength. "Winter bites hard," he answered, his voice measured and clear despite the accent. "You're out here alone." He tipped his chin toward the animal. "Meat will see you through." The plain truth of it, spoken without waiting for thanks, struck a chord deep in Sophronia's chest. For 5 years, Hezekiah Grimm had seen to her needs like checking off items on a tally sheet. Duty done, obligation met. But this stranger, raised among people she'd been taught to dread, had noticed her empty larder and acted. No strings, no show. "Thank you," she said, the gratitude heavier this time, realer. "Come warm up by the fire." She watched him cross to the hearth and stretch his hands toward the flames. The shifting light carved the strong lines of his cheekbones, caught the steady watchfulness in his eyes. Without the heavy buckskin coat, she could see the lean, hard-earned power in his frame, the way he carried himself with a dignity that came from inside, not from any pose or polish. "You hunted through the storm?" she asked, stepping to the tiny kitchen corner to set water heating for tea. "Storm broke before first light," he replied. "Deer move after fresh snow, looking for forage." He glanced her way from the fireside. "You've got a solid spot here, sheltered from the worst wind, near the creek." "It was my husband's pick," Sophronia said, the words slipping out before she could catch them. "He's gone now. 2 years." Itzachu nodded, taking the news without the clumsy pity she'd come to hate from the rare visitors who made the trek to her door. "You stay," he said simply. "Most women would head back to kin." There was no judgment in his tone, just observation, and that made honesty easy. "My folks keep asking me to come to Cimarron," she admitted, pausing to find the right words for a choice she still didn't entirely understand. "But this place, it's mine now. Maybe the only thing that really is." A flicker of recognition passed through his dark eyes. "A place that's truly your own. That's no small thing," he said. and the quiet weight in his voice told her he knew that truth from hard miles of his own. They slipped into silence after that, but it wasn't the hollow quiet that had haunted her days since Hezekiah's death. This silence felt alive, thick with a shared understanding that needed no words to hold it steady. She finished steeping the tea and handed him a tin cup. He accepted it with a brief nod of thanks. They sat together by the fire, the deer waiting patiently to be dressed, and Sophronia felt her shoulders ease in a way she hadn't known in years. His presence asked for nothing, yet gave a steady, solid company, like stumbling across a half-remembered song you didn't know you still knew the words to. When he spoke again, the offer caught her off guard. "I'll show you how to dress the deer," he said, "so next time you'll know." The words were practical, but the gift behind them, knowledge, self-reliance, made her pause with the cup halfway to her mouth. He wasn't just handing her food, he was handing her the means to stand on her own. "I'd like that," she answered quietly, and the faint smile that touched his face softened the solemn lines there, brightening everything for a heartbeat. As night pressed thicker around the cabin, Itsachu began the lesson. With steady, patient hands, he showed her the first careful cuts, how to peel the hide away with almost no waste, how to find and set aside the parts that mattered most. Every motion carried respect, almost reverence, and he spoke low of the old Apache way. The deer gave its life freely, and honor demanded nothing less than using every piece with care. Sophronia watched, learned, the first wave of unease giving way to sharp focus. This was raw survival. Plain, unadorned, nothing like the polite rules that had boxed her life back in St. Louis. There was a strange freedom in it, in facing necessities head-on without pretty words or proper distance to hide behind. By the time the meat was portioned, some for tonight's pot, the rest ready for smoking or drying, the fire had dwindled to embers, and weariness tugged at her bones. Yet her mind buzzed with new knowing, and a quiet closeness had grown between them through the shared labor, warm and unexpected. When Itsachu gathered his things to go, a sudden ache of disappointment surprised her. "It's late," she said, nodding toward the black night beyond the windows. "You could stay, by the fire. Too cold to travel now." He studied her face for a long beat, as though reading something only he could see, then gave one slow nod. "I'll leave at first light," he said. That night, Sophronia lay in her narrow bed, while Itsachu slept on the hearth in the main room. The sound of another person's steady breathing filled the cabin. Strange, unfamiliar. It should have set her nerves on edge. This man was still a stranger, from a people her whole life had painted as enemies. Instead, a deep sense of rightness settled over her, like a crooked piece of her world had finally clicked into place. Outside, an owl sent its lonely call rolling across the moonlit snow. Inside, two unlikely souls shared the fire's dying glow, and the first fragile threads of a bond neither had looked for, but both, perhaps, had needed more than they knew. 3 days passed after that first shared night, and Sophronia caught herself drifting to the tree line again and again, pausing mid-chore to search the clearing for the slightest stir. She told herself it was plain good sense, keeping watch after a stranger had walked right up to her place, but the quick, eager twist in her gut whenever a shadow shifted among the pines told the real story. On the 4th day, while pinning sheets to the line in the sharp, clean mountain breeze, she saw him. Itsachu Thorn stood at the forest's edge, arms full of bundled roots and dried leaves, watching her with that same calm, steady look. When their eyes met, he didn't fade back into the trees. Instead, he started straight toward her, boots making almost no sound on the frost-crusted ground. "You're back," Sophronia said, surprise spilling into her voice before she could catch it. Itsuchu dipped his head, lifting the bundle a little. "Medicine plants," he explained, "for the sickness winter brings. I'll show you which ones work." Once again, no handouts, just the gift of knowing how to stand on her own. Warmth bloomed in Sophronia's chest that had nothing to do with the pale sun overhead. "Come in," she said, motioning towards the cabin door. What followed was an afternoon unlike any schoolroom lesson from her girlhood days. They sat at the small table while Itsuchu spread out each root and leaf, naming them, describing their power, showing how to spot them in the wild and turn them into remedies for fever, cough, or worse. His knowledge ran deep and sure, handed down through lifetimes of people who'd learned to live in balance with this harsh, beautiful country. Sophronia leaned in, hanging on every word, scribbling notes in her journal, asking questions he answered with the same quiet thoughtfulness. He gave everything. His patience held steady even when she stumbled over the Apache names he taught her right alongside the uses. "This one," he said, holding up a pale root. "Stops bleeding fast. Grind it fine, pack it in the wound." He mimed the grinding motion with strong fingers. "Kept me alive once. Soldier's bullet." The offhand mention of gunfire made Sophronia's pen freeze mid-stroke. "You fought soldiers?" she asked softly. A shadow crossed Itsuchu's face, brief but real. "Sometimes," he said. "Sometimes I guided them. It was tangled." The slight catch in his usually even voice told her she'd brushed against old hurt. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. "I shouldn't have asked." He shook his head. "No need. The past stays where it is." His gaze met hers across the table, clear and direct. "Like your husband. Gone, but he still marks the trail you walk." The insight hit her square. She hadn't expected him to see so clearly. "Yes," she admitted, "though half the time I wonder if I ever really knew him." "You didn't choose each other," Itsuchu said. Not accusing, just curious. Sophronia gave a small, wry smile. "Does anybody? My folks arranged it. Hezekiah needed someone to keep house while he chased deals on the road. I was 19, prospects thin, no dowry worth a dime." She glanced down at her hands, startled to hear herself opening up to this near stranger. "We shared 5 years before he passed, but I think we never truly crossed paths." Itsuchu sat quiet a moment, face thoughtful. "My people say a real match has to stand equal, not in muscle or skill, but in spirit, in choosing." "And did you ever find that?" Sophronia asked, before she could pull the words back. A faint, sorrowful smile curved his mouth. "Once. She died bringing our child. The baby followed her." He said it flat, no drama, but the old grief showed in the set of his shoulders. Sophronia's throat tightened. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, meaning every word. He nodded once, accepting the sympathy without lingering. "Life keeps moving," he said, "like a river after a boulder drops in. Changed, but still running strong." The plain truth of it landed hard. How different from the stiff mourning customs she'd been raised with. The proper black dresses, the measured months of sorrow, the rules that tried to box even grief. Itsuchu's way felt tougher, truer, pain as part of the current, not something to wall off. By the time daylight began to slip away outside, Sophronia realized hours had vanished at that table, surrounded by drying plants and talk that had wandered far past healing herbs. She stood to light the lamps, suddenly feeling the closeness that had grown between them, woven from stories shared and comfortable quiet. "Stay for supper?" she asked, the invitation coming easy, surprising her. "Got venison stew left from your last gift." Itzachu's face softened just a touch. "Yes," he said. "I'd like that." Over the simple meal, their words kept flowing, starting with hard-won tricks of frontier living, then drifting deeper into the worlds they'd each come from. Sophronia found herself talking about growing up in St. Louis, the schoolteacher dreams that had dried up in these lonely mountains, the books she still clung to like windows on bigger skies. In return, he spoke of Apache ways, the ceremonies that marked the turning seasons and the big passages of life, the old stories that made sense of the land and everything on it. His accented English carried the pictures clear and bright. A culture bound tight to the earth, full of meaning she'd never imagined. "How'd you pick up English so smooth?" Sophronia asked as they pushed back from the empty plates. Itzachu's face tightened just a fraction, guard coming up like a shutter. "Mission school," he said. "Taken there as a boy. 8 years. After that I scouted and translated for the army." His voice stayed level, but the hard set of his jaw spoke of memories that still stung. "And these days?" She pressed gently, sensing layers he hadn't yet peeled back. He held silent a long beat, weighing what to give her. "Now I walk between worlds," he answered at last. "Not Apache enough anymore, never white enough, so I carve my own trail." His dark eyes locked on hers across the scarred table. "Like you, alone in this cabin." The words landed like a quiet thunderclap. Sophronia felt the truth of it settle in her bones. They were both drifters in their own way, living in the narrow strips of ground nobody else claimed. That shared edge built a bridge between them, stronger than blood or birthplace. As the evening thickened outside, Itzachu stood and gathered the leftover plants into tidy bundles for her to keep. At the doorway he paused, looking down at her with an expression she couldn't quite name. Part promise, part question. "I'll come again," he said, not quite asking, not quite telling. "I'd like that," Sophronia answered, startled by how sure her own voice sounded. He gave one short nod, then stepped into the night, his shape blending into the black under the trees until he was gone. Sophronia lingered in the open doorway, watching the empty dark, only closing the door when the cold finally nipped through her shawl. The cabin felt different when she turned back inside, warmer somehow, or maybe just not so hollow. That night, getting ready for bed, she moved with a new kind of attention to herself. She brushed her hair slower, longer strokes than usual, then paused at the tiny mirror over the washstand to really look. Color still bloomed high on her cheeks. It had been years since she'd studied her own face like this. Years since anything close to anticipation or hope had stirred under her skin. Outside, the winter moon poured pale silver over the snow. Inside, something tender and alive was pushing up through long, frozen ground, reaching for light. Over the next few weeks, a rhythm took hold, quietly reshaping Sophronia's lonesome days. Itzachu appeared every 3 or 4 mornings, sometimes with fresh killed game slung over his shoulder, sometimes with bundles of useful roots or hides, always carrying something to teach. Each stay stretched longer than the last. Talk that started with snares and edible greens soon wandered into bigger country. Their separate lives, the worlds they'd each been shaped by. She learned he'd been born Mescalero Apache, but pulled young into white ways. Mission school first, then years scouting and interpreting for the army. That life had given him 3 tongues, Apache, English, Spanish, but no real belonging anywhere. He lived on the edges now, hunting, trapping, bartering at distant outposts, answerable to no tribe, no flag. In return, she opened up about the girl she'd been before this cabin. St. Louis streets, a father's money troubles that killed her school dreams, one short season playing debutante before hard times funneled her toward men like Hezekiah, steady providers who offered roofs, but no fire. She spoke aloud things she'd never trusted to another soul, finding freedom in Itzachu's listening silence. With every visit, the space between them shrank. What began as lessons, setting rabbit snares, spotting wild onions, curing meat for lean months, grew into true company. Days spent working side by side flowed into evenings by the fire, trading stories or simply sitting in easy quiet. Sophronia started looking forward to his coming with a sharp, almost scary hunger. She dug out her better dresses even though they snagged on rough wood. She pinned her hair in ways she'd given up after Hezekiah died. Each time Itzachu noticed the change, the quiet appreciation in his eyes sent heat racing through her. One bitter January evening, with wind clawing at the shutters, they sat closer to the fire than ever before. Sophronia mended a torn hem, while Itzachu shaped a small piece of wood with his knife, blade moving with that familiar, effortless grace. "Can I ask you something?" she said, laying the sewing in her lap. He lifted his gaze, firelight dancing in his eyes. "Go ahead." "Aren't you afraid coming here? If folks from the settlement spotted you?" His hands stilled on the carving. "Fear's a luxury for people with lots of paths to choose from," he said. "My people are being driven off their lands. A lot have been killed. The rest pushed onto reservations miles from anything familiar." His voice stayed even, but Sophronia felt the deep current of grief and anger running beneath it. "I choose to live free, even if the price is high." "Is that why you're out here alone?" she asked softly. He met her eyes straight on. 3 years I scouted for the army, believed their talk of peace, of protecting my people." Bitterness edged his words, quiet but sharp. "When I saw what they really meant, I walked away. Now neither side trusts me." The weight of that confession hung thick between them. Sophronia realized in a rush how much risk he took every time he stepped into her clearing. His aloneness, like hers, wasn't just preference. It was cost paid for choices most would never understand. "I'm sorry," she whispered, knowing the words fell short of the betrayals and losses they couldn't undo. "Don't be," he said. "What's done is done. We can't unmake it. We can only decide what we do right now." Itzachu's eyes held Sophronia's, open, unguarded for the first time, and the quiet strength in them cracked something wide inside her. "And I choose to be here." The plain honesty of it hit hard. In 5 years with Hezekiah Grimm, he'd never once picked her over a business trip or a ledger. 5 years of careful distance, and she'd never once felt truly seen. Not like this. Not by a man who had every reason, by blood and history, to see her as the enemy. Without thinking, she reached across the small space and laid her hand over his. Itzachu went still, gaze never wavering from her face. For one suspended heartbeat, neither breathed. Then, slow as sunrise, he turned his palm up. His fingers threaded through hers, calloused, rough from a lifetime of hard living, so different from Hezekiah's smooth trader's hands. The warmth of his skin poured into her like sunlight, breaking through storm clouds, waking hungers she hadn't known she carried. "Sophronia," he murmured, her name sounding like a vow on his tongue. She didn't know who leaned in first, only that the distance between them vanished, and his mouth found hers, tentative at the start, then deeper, fiercer as she answered. One hand cupped her face with a gentleness that nearly brought tears. The kiss itself lit fires she'd never felt before. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Sophronia saw the same stunned wonder and raw want mirrored in his eyes. Outside, the wind kept up its lonesome wail across the ridges. Inside, The quiet between them buzzed with promise neither had dared dream of until now. "I should head out," he said, voice rough with feeling, though his fingers stayed locked with hers. "Stay," Sophronia whispered. The single word felt like both plea and truth laid bare. "Please, stay." In the shifting glow of the fire, Itzachu's face softened into something so tender it squeezed her heart. "You sure?" In answer, she stood, drawing him up with her. With fingers that shook just a little, she led him towards the small bedroom. The room where she'd spent so many nights wrapped in nothing but silence and her own thoughts. Tonight, that emptiness had no claim. Crossing the threshold together, Sophronia felt she wasn't just stepping into a room. She was stepping into a whole new way of being. One where she wasn't measured by what she'd lost or never had, but by what she was brave enough to reach for. The single lamp threw long shadows across the walls as they faced each other, the air thick with anticipation and the faintest edge of nerves. Sophronia had never done this, never invited a man to her bed because she wanted him, never moved on pure desire instead of duty. With Hezekiah, closeness had been quick, mechanical, a duty checked off without ever touching her soul. Itzachu seemed to feel her hesitation. With endless patience, he lifted a hand to her cheek, thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone like he was learning her by heart. "No need to hurry," he said low. "The night's ours." The gentleness in his touch, the respect in every word, cracked open the tight shell years of proper manners had built around her. She leaned into his palm, turned her head, and pressed a soft kiss there. A quiet yes, a spark of trust and rising want. "I've never—" she started, words failing to capture the newness of craving instead of enduring. "I know," he said simply, and somehow he truly did understand what she couldn't say. With careful, deliberate care, he began showing her what love between bodies could be when it was about shared joy, not obligation. His hands and mouth moved over her with reverence, making her feel strong and fragile at once, wanted and treasured. He taught her the silent language of touch, how a slow stroke could ask, how a soft gasp could answer, how two people could speak without a single word. For the first time, Sophronia discovered what her own body could feel. Under his patient lead, she learned to name her wants, to reach for pleasure instead of waiting for it to be given. Every new touch was a revelation. Every shared breath felt deeper than anything the stiff drawing rooms of her youth had ever offered. When they finally came together, it wasn't the cold, rote act she'd known with Hezekiah. It was a meeting of equals, giving and taking in perfect balance. Itzachu whispered to her in Apache, the unfamiliar words falling against her skin like poetry. She didn't understand the language, but she felt the meaning in the way he moved with her, the tenderness that carried her through waves of sensation she'd never believed possible. Afterward, tangled under the quilts as their bodies cooled in the night air, tears slipped from Sophronia's eyes. Not sorrow, but the sudden, sharp knowledge of how much had been denied her, how small her ideas of closeness had been, how little she'd dared hope for real joy. Itzachu saw the tears at once. Concern flashed across his face. Gentle fingers brushed them away, a silent question in his eyes. "I didn't know," she whispered, voice catching. "I never knew it could feel like this." Understanding lit his features, followed by a tenderness that made her chest ache. He drew her closer, arms wrapping around her like shelter from every lonely year before this one. "This is how it ought to be," he murmured against her temple. "Two people choosing each other, heart, body, everything. Anything less isn't worth having." The plain power of his words cut straight through Sophronia. How different from the tangled rules of polite society that had shaped her ideas of marriage and closeness. How much more honest than the cold math of safety and standing that had pushed her into Hezekiah Grimm's bed. As the night wrapped deeper around the cabin, Sophronia and Itsachu kept on discovering one another with slow touches and soft-spoken secrets. His hands moved over her like he was reading a sacred map, learning every curve while she found the courage to let her pleasure out without shame. She traced the story of his body in return. The thick scar on his shoulder from an old soldier's bullet, the detailed tattoo across his chest that marked his coming of age among his people, the way raw strength and quiet gentleness lived side by side in his hands. Outside, the winter wind finally eased, leaving a deep, hush-filled quiet broken only now and then by a night bird's call. Inside, two souls from lives that should never have touched built their own small world of skin and trust, forging something fresh in the gap between everything they'd known before. Dawn crept in slow, brushing the eastern sky with pale streaks of light. Sophronia rested her head on Itsachu's chest, listening to the strong, even thump of his heart. The night had changed something fundamental, crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. She knew with a certainty that should have scared her but instead settled her soul, that nothing in her life would ever look the same again. "What now?" she asked quietly, the question carrying far more than just the hours ahead. Itsachu's hand moved in lazy circles along her back, comforting, yet stirring her all over again. "Now we choose," he said simply. "Every day we choose." The freedom in those words lit her up and shook her at the same time. Hezekiah's death had cut one set of chains, but the world's hold lingered, unseen ropes that had kept her locked away in this cabin instead of facing the hard stairs that would come with a different life. "It won't be easy," she said, letting the fear under her new joy finally have voice. "If anyone from the settlement ever found out about us." "When has anything worth a damn come easy?" Itsachu answered, a quiet edge of challenge in his tone. "Your folks see only Apache. My people see only white. But we see each other." He took her hand and pressed it to his chest. "This is what counts." Sophronia felt the steady pulse under her palm and understood. Despite every wall of language, custom, and bloody history, in the ways that mattered most, they were the same. Two hearts beating strong, two spirits reaching for connection in a world hell-bent on tearing them apart. The first sunlight slipped through the cabin's small window, turning Itsachu's skin to warm gold. In that moment, Sophronia made her choice. Whatever storms waited, whatever price they'd pay for stepping over lines others had drawn, this bond was worth guarding, worth the fight, worth building a whole new life around, no matter how rough the trail ahead. The day started with that unspoken promise, that private oath between two people who'd found in each other the kind of acceptance, want, and love they'd never dared hope for, free of conditions, free of duty, free of limits. Dawn came gentle but sure over the mountains, washing the snow in soft pinks and golds. Sophronia woke slowly, first feeling the unfamiliar heat of another body stretched along hers, then hearing the deep, steady rhythm of breathing close by. Itsachu. The night rushed back in a flood of feeling, his hands learning her with patient reverence, his Apache whispers she couldn't translate but felt straight to her core, the way he'd looked at her like she was something rare and unexpected he'd just found. For the first time ever, Sophronia had felt truly wanted, truly seen. She turned carefully to watch him sleep. Without that constant alertness he usually wore, Itsachu looked younger, more open. The hard line of his jaw eased, lips parted just a little, dark hair spilled across her pillow. Sophronia fought the urge to reach out, half afraid touching him would prove it was all a loneliness-born dream. As if he felt her stare, Itzachu's eyes opened. Surprise flickered there for a second, then melted into a warmth that set her heart racing. "You stayed," she whispered. His hand lifted, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face, fingers lingering against her skin. "I stayed," he said, voice still thick with sleep and something deeper, more private. In the clear morning light, the size of what they'd shared should have felt wrong, forbidden. Instead, Sophronia felt only a deep rightness that laughed at everything she'd ever been taught about the world and her place in it. "What happens now?" she asked again, the question bigger than the day in front of them. Itzachu's face grew thoughtful. "Now we choose," he said. "Every single day we choose." The deep freedom in his words thrilled her and scared her in equal measure. Hezekiah's passing had freed her from one cage of expectations, but society's grip hadn't let go. Those invisible chains had kept her hidden here, instead of facing the judgment that would rain down on a life like this. "It won't be easy," she said, naming the fear that hid under her happiness. "If anyone from the settlement ever found out—" "When has anything worth keeping come easy?" Itzachu replied, a quiet challenge in his voice. "Your people see only Apache. My people see only white. But we see each other." He took her hand again and laid it over his heart. "This is what matters." Sophronia felt the strong, steady beat against her palm and knew, beyond every divide of tongue, tradition, and hard history, they were the same in the only way that counted. Two hearts, two souls hunting connection in a world that tried its best to keep them separate. They rose together, moving through the morning chores with fresh awareness of one another. Itzachu built the fire higher, while Sophronia fixed a simple breakfast of cornbread and dried fruit. They sat shoulder to shoulder at the little table, knees brushing under the rough planks, sharing glances loaded with whole unspoken talks, while they ate the simple breakfast of cornbread and dried apples. "I've got to hunt today," Itzachu said after a while, though he stayed planted right where he was. "Winter's digging in deeper. We need more meat." That small "we" shot straight through Sophronia, like lightning. For 5 years with Hezekiah Grimm, it had always been you and I. 2 lives running side by side, but never really touching. Hearing that one word from Itzachu felt more binding than any church vow she'd ever heard. "I'll get the smoking rack ready," she answered without a second thought, folding herself right into his plan, "and pull more herbs up from the root cellar." He nodded, eyes shining with a quiet appreciation that went far beyond her helping hands. As they moved through the morning chores together, Sophronia marveled at how easy it all felt. How they flowed around each other in the tight cabin space, reading each other's needs before a word was spoken, stepping in to help without being asked. When it came time for Itzachu to head out, he cupped her face in both hands and kissed her with such aching gentleness that tears stung her eyes. "I'll be back before sundown," he promised. Sophronia watched him melt into the pines, his shape blending so perfectly with the wild country that it might as well have been his real home. Only after he was gone did she lift her fingers to her still tingling lips and let the truth settle. She was falling in love with him. The words slipped out in a whisper to the empty clearing. "I'm falling in love with him." Terrifying and freeing all at once. The day flew by in a rush of busy work as Sophronia poured her restless energy into the cabin, sweeping floors that were already clean, straightening shelves that didn't need it, and finally pulling out her best dress, the one saved for rare trips to see her folks. She laid it across the bed with a flutter of anticipation she hadn't felt in years. True to his word, Itzachu returned just as the sun dipped low, a pair of rabbits slung over one shoulder. His usual calm face cracked into a smile the second he saw her waiting on the porch. That smile changed everything about him, stealing Sophronia's breath, because she knew it was meant for her alone. They cleaned the rabbits together, Sophronia moving with new confidence in the ways he'd taught her. As they worked side by side, she found herself sharing stories from her girlhood. Lazy summers on the Mississippi, the dusty shelves of her father's bookshop where she first fell in love with stories, the little sister taken by fever when they were both too young to understand loss. Itsuchu listened with that fierce attention he gave everything, asking questions that showed he really wanted to know her, who she'd been, where she came from. When he spoke of his own boyhood among the Mescalero Apache, his words brought the world alive. A life built on fierce respect for the land, unbreakable bonds of family, and responsibilities that ran as deep as blood. As darkness settled, they moved inside to the fire's warmth, and something shifted again. The hungry rush of the night before gave way to slower, deliberate touches. A savoring of every kiss, every brush of skin. Itsuchu taught her Apache words for the parts of her body as his hands and lips followed. Hair, eyes, lips, heart. The strange sounds turned into something holy, a private language just for desire. Later, tangled under the quilts with the fire down to glowing coals, Sophronia felt an emotion so big it threatened to burst her open. "I never knew it could feel like this," she confessed, head on his shoulder, fingers tracing the jagged scar on his chest. The one he'd said came from a soldier's bullet years ago. "Like what?" he asked, hand circling slow patterns on her back. "Like coming home," she answered, the truth rising from somewhere deep and honest. "All my life I've felt like a guest in my own skin. Even here in this cabin, I was just passing time, waiting for something I couldn't name. But with you, I feel real, like I finally showed up where I belong." Itsuchu's face softened into something so tender it hurt to look at. He cradled her cheek, thumb following the curve of her cheekbone. "My people have a saying," he murmured, voice low in the dark. "The Creator lays many trails for every soul, but only one true path." He pressed his forehead to hers, breaths mingling in the small space between them. "Maybe this is ours." For the quiet acceptance in his words unlocked something long buried inside Sophronia. Tears slipped free. Not grief, but release. The shedding of a loneliness she'd worn so long she thought it was normal. The embrace of a bond so unlikely it could only be a gift. Itsuchu wiped the tears away with gentle fingers, understanding without a word needed. In that heartbeat, Sophronia knew, bone deep, no turning back, that whatever lay ahead, whatever cost they paid for stepping across lines others had drawn, these moments of perfect seeing between two souls made it all worth it. Outside, fresh snow began to fall, wiping away tracks, softening sharp edges, blanketing the hard truths of the world beyond their door. Inside, wrapped tight in each other's arms, Sophronia and Itsuchu built their own truth, one where skin and old histories weighed less than the shared heartbeat of two people who'd found each other against every odd. As sleep pulled her under, she heard Itsuchu whispering in Apache, the words foreign, but their meaning crystal clear in the holy space between waking and dreams. He was weaving their story with sound, tracing two impossible trails that had somehow met and merged. A story that, against every rule and reason, was becoming hers too. The days after settled into a rhythm as steady and natural as the seasons turning. Itsuchu would head out to hunt or gather, while Itsuchu would head out at first light to hunt or gather what the land offered, while Sophronia kept their little home running smooth, each doing what they did best, building something solid together day by day. Evenings meant shared work and easy talk by the fire. Nights brought deeper discoveries, touches that kept peeling back new layers of closeness. They never put words to it, But Itsachu started spending far more time inside the cabin than out. His few belongings quietly claimed space. Extra buckskins hung next to her dresses on the pegs. His hunting knife rested on the shelf by the door, his steady presence filling corners that had sat empty too long. January hardened into February, bringing sharper cold and heavier snowfalls. The loneliness that once felt like bars around Sophronia now wrapped around them like a shield, hiding them from a world that would call what they had impossible, or worse. In their snow-locked haven they made their own ways, small rituals blending bits of Apache custom with pieces of her own upbringing into traditions that belonged only to them. On the bitterest nights, Itsachu would spin old Apache tales. How the world got made, the mischief of Coyote, the deep wisdom of Buffalo. Stories that had carried his people through hard seasons. Sophronia would read aloud from her handful of treasured books, sharing poems and lines of prose that had kept her company through the empty years. They picked up pieces of each other's language bit by bit. He taught her Apache words and phrases. She smoothed out the rough edges of the English he'd learned in mission school. Every new word felt like another plank laid across a bridge between their worlds, another stitch in the life they were sewing together. One mid-February evening, sharing a thick stew of rabbit and wild onions by the fire, Sophronia found her mind turning clear and sharp toward what lay ahead, a mix of excitement and fear that tightened her chest. "What happens when spring breaks?" she asked, finally giving voice to the question that had hung between them unspoken. "When the passes open up and folks start moving again?" Itsachu went still for a long moment, firelight carving thoughtful lines across his face. "What do you want to happen?" he asked, dark eyes meeting hers straight on. The directness of it caught her off guard. All her life, her wants had been pushed to the side. By her folks, by Hezekiah, by the rules society laid down from the day she was born. That Itsachu would put her desires at the center of their future felt like fresh air after years in a closed room. "I want—" She stopped, feeling the weight of what she was about to say. "I want us to stay together, whatever way we can make it work. I don't want to go back to half-living, pretending none of this ever happened." Something eased in Itsachu's expression. Relief, maybe, like he'd been holding his breath. "There are places," he said carefully, "where folks like us can make a life. Not easy, but possible. Down near the Mexican line, Apache, Mexican, white, all mixed in together. Nobody asks too many questions about what came before." Hope flared bright in Sophronia's chest, even as the hard truths crowded in. "My parents," she said softly, "they'd never understand. They already lost one daughter, losing me too. The roughest trails ask the heaviest tolls," Itsachu acknowledged, reaching across the table to take her hand. "But you won't carry it alone." The steady promise in his voice, the calm certainty in his eyes, gave Sophronia a strength she hadn't known she had. In this Apache man, someone every story she'd grown up with painted as the enemy, she'd found a true partner, one who saw her plain, valued her choices, backed her without trying to take the reins. "We could start fresh," she whispered, the idea unfolding like a map to uncharted country. "Build something new together." Itsachu nodded, thumb moving slow circles over her palm. "When the high snow melts and the passes open," he said, "we'll decide. Till then, we've got this time. To get ready, to make what's between us stronger." That night their lovemaking carried new weight, not just chasing pleasure, but sealing a promise of the future taking shape between them. Every caress held tomorrow in it. Every shared breath felt like a vow stronger than any preacher's words. As February gave way to March, small signs of spring started showing. Longer days, the drip of melting ice from the eaves, birds returning to the bare branches. With those changes came the growing sense that their hidden world had an expiration date. One morning, Sophronia woke to an empty space beside her, the sheets still warm where Itzachu had been. She found him outside, crouched near the clearing's edge, studying tracks in the snow. "Someone rode through here," he said without turning, as she stepped up beside him and pulled her shawl tighter against the morning bite. "2 men on horseback? Yesterday, maybe the day before." A chill that had nothing to do with the air ran down Sophronia's spine. "Hunters?" she asked, already knowing better. Itzachu shook his head, face grave. "Soldiers. Army patrol heading north toward the fort." The meaning settled heavy between them. No need to speak it out loud. Their quiet refuge wasn't as cut off as they'd thought. The bigger world was waking up from winter, bringing back all the old dangers and narrow-minded hate they'd managed to leave behind for a while. "Did they come close to the cabin?" Sophronia asked, eyes sweeping the tree line like she might see blue coats riding out any second. "No," Itzachu answered. "They kept to the ridge, but they'll come back this way. Snow's melting up high. Passes will open soon." The hard truth of their place in the world sharpened like a fresh-honed blade. Whatever path they chose next, the clock was ticking. Winter's thick blanket of safety was already starting to thin. That afternoon they patched the cabin roof together, fixing shingles torn loose by brutal storms. Sophronia watched Itzachu with fresh eyes. The steady, sure way his hands worked the wood. The calm certainty he brought even to jobs he'd never done before. The quick glances he threw her way, like he needed to know she was still right there beside him. It struck her hard how strange and wondrous it was. This man who'd stepped into her life as a stranger, the living symbol of everything she'd been raised to fear, had in mere months become the very center of her days. Crossing the line society had drawn in blood hadn't brought ruin or shame. It had brought rescue, honor, and the deepest bond she'd ever known. That evening they sat close on the porch, watching the sun bleed gold and purple across the high peaks. Itzachu took her hand, his face more serious than she'd seen it in weeks. "I have to ride out tomorrow," he said, the words dropping heavy into the quiet. "Could be days, maybe longer." Fear clamped around Sophronia's heart. "Because of the soldiers?" He nodded, jaw tightening for a heartbeat. "Words come up from the south. The army's pushing hard on the ones still holding out, trying to herd them onto the reservation. I need to warn my mother's kin, help any who want to slip north into Colorado." "It's dangerous," she said, not asking, just stating the plain fact. "Yes," he admitted, no sugarcoating. "But it has to be done. They're my blood. I can't turn my back, even if some of them see me as half-outsider now." The quiet struggle in his voice cut deep. Sophronia saw it clear. Itzachu carried divided loyalties, to his heritage, to his own sense of right, and now to her, trying to honor them all without breaking faith with any. "I understand," she said softly, meaning every word. She swallowed her own fear for his safety. He had enough weight without it. "When do you leave?" "First light," he answered, thumb tracing slow patterns across her palm. "Snow still holds tracks. I'll move quicker alone." The unspoken question hung thick. Would she be here when he got back? Would she wait, knowing the risks, accepting the uncertainty? Sophronia turned to him fully, lifted her free hand to his face, tracing the strong line of his cheekbone, the curve of lips that had shown her what real wanting felt like. "I'll be right here," she vowed, the words as solemn as any spoken in a church. "However long it takes." Relief and gratitude washed over Itzachu's face. He pulled her close, forehead resting against hers in that quiet gesture that had become their deepest way of speaking. "I will come back to you," he whispered, breath warm against her lips. I swear it by everything sacred." That night, in the darkened bedroom, their bedroom now, Sophronia memorized him with hands and mouth, storing every line and scar like winter stores against hard times. He murmured promises against her skin in Apache and English both, weaving their futures tight with words that rose above every line the world had drawn. In the gray half-light before sunrise, Sophronia watched Itsachu ready himself. He moved with that silent, practiced grace she'd come to love, packing light, checking rifle and knife with calm, deadly focus. His face had settled into the watchful warrior look she knew. Alert, weighing every shadow, ready for whatever the trail threw at him. When the moment to leave could be put off no longer, he turned to her in the doorway, the frozen wilderness stretching wide behind him. "I've got something for you," he said, reaching into his pouch. He pressed a small wooden carving into her hand. An eagle caught mid-flight, wings spread wide, every feather carved with careful love. She knew it instantly, the piece he'd worked on during quiet evenings by the fire. "Eagles mate for life," he told her, folding her fingers around it. "Once they choose, they build a nest together, stronger every season." His hand slid gently to rest against her belly, the touch so tender tears pricked her eyes. "I'll come back to help build ours." The promise in that simple gesture swelled her heart near to bursting. Sophronia reached up to the eagle feather always tied at his temple. "May I?" At his nod, she carefully loosened the red cord, slipped a lock of her own hair beneath it, and retied the feather, her fingers trembling but sure. "A piece of me rides with you," she said, voice thick. "A reminder of what's waiting." Itsachu touched the feather now bound with her hair, face solemn. "I carry you with me," he vowed. Then he kissed her, deep, fierce, full of beginnings instead of goodbyes, full of faith in tomorrow. And he was gone, slipping swift and silent into the trees, until the forest took him whole. Sophronia stood in the doorway long after, the carved eagle clutched tight, its wings pressing into her palm. Only when the cold finally bit through her shawl did she step back inside, and shut the door against a world that would brand what they'd found wrong and impossible. She set the carving on the mantel where the fire's glow made the wings seem to beat. Watching it, Sophronia felt a rock-solid certainty rise up against every doubt, whispering at the edges of her mind. What she and Itsachu had built together wasn't wrong. It was the truest thing she'd ever known. What she and Itsachu had found in each other wasn't wrong at all. It might have been the one purely right thing she'd ever touched in her life. The weeks after Itsachu rode out stretched long and hard, each one a fresh trial of the strength and patience Sophronia had only lately discovered inside herself. She kept their home steady with the know-how he'd passed on, splitting firewood with growing sureness, putting up the last of their shared stores, feeding the fire against February's deepening bite. At night, she sat by candlelight with her journal, setting down not just the day's plain work, but the quiet revolution blooming in her heart. Purpose and hope taking root where only weary acceptance had grown before. When February finally loosened its grip and March slipped in, Sophronia started feeling changes in her own body, tenderness in her breasts, a stubborn queasiness every morning, a heavy tiredness that sank clear to her bones. At first she blamed Itsachu's long absence, but one dawn, kneeling over a basin while her stomach heaved, the truth hit her clean and bright. She carried his child. The knowledge should have sent terror racing through her. A white widow, unmarried, pregnant by an Apache man. Society had no corner for a woman like that, or the child she bore. Yet as she pressed her palm to her still flat belly, what rushed in wasn't fear, but a fierce, shielding joy. This little life, made from love instead of obligation, stood for everything she and Itza Chu had built. A future neither had dared picture until they found one another. A future that laughed at the hard lines others drew between people. In that quiet moment, cradling the secret growing inside her, Sophronia chose. Whatever storms came, whatever price she paid, she would guard this child and the love that sparked it. She would claim the life she wanted instead of settling for the one the world insisted she take. That rock-solid decision poured fresh strength into her. She inventoried their supplies, picking out what they'd need if they headed south. She pored over the old maps Hezekiah had left, tracing routes toward the border settlements Itza Chu had spoken of. She drilled the survival ways he'd taught her, determined to stand as his equal, never a drag, when the trail got rough. As March rolled on, warmer days, first green shoots pushing through melting snow, Sophronia's worry for Itza Chu sharpened with every sunrise. He'd warned he might be gone weeks, but each empty day wore at her trust that he'd make it back. One afternoon, the far-off crack of gunfire sent panic clawing up her throat. It lasted till dark, her mind spinning pictures of him hurt, captured, his promise broken by the same violence that shadowed his people like a curse. One sleepless night she stood at the window, staring at the moonlit clearing, the wooden eagle tight in her fist like a good luck charm. "Come back to us," she whispered, one hand curved protectively over her belly where their child grew. "We need you." As if the night itself answered, a shadow stirred at the tree line. Sophronia's heart slammed against her ribs, hope and dread tangling tight. Then Itza Chu stepped into the moonlight, same fluid grace she remembered, dark against the silver snow. Relief hit her so hard her legs nearly gave out. She didn't stop for shawl or boots, just flung the door wide and ran across the frozen ground, cold biting her feet and face. He caught her against his chest, his arms closed around her with a strength that stole her breath and filled her heart to overflowing. For long seconds they simply held on, no words needed for the raw relief of being together again. When she finally eased back to look up, the weeks had marked him clear. Thinner, new lines carved around his eyes from hard choices and harder miles. A fresh scar traced his jaw, still pink. He favored his left side like something there still ached. "You're hurt," she said, joy at his return shadowed by worry. Itza Chu shook his head. "Nothing that won't mend," he told her, voice rough from tiredness or feeling. "All that matters is I'm here." They walked back to the cabin together, his arm firm around her waist, like he couldn't bear even an inch of space between them. In the firelight she'd kept burning, Sophronia saw the full toll. Beyond the cuts and bruises, a new heaviness sat in his eyes. Things witnessed, decisions made, burdens that weighed on his spirit. "What happened?" she asked quietly, heating water for tea while he eased into the chair by the hearth. Itza Chu stared into the flames a long moment. "War's coming," he said at last. "Not with flags and speeches, but real war all the same. The army's moving on anyone who won't go to the reservation. My people fight where they can, but it's—" He searched for the word. "Uneven, like wolf against grizzly." Sophronia set the tea beside him and took his hand. "Did you reach them in time? Warn them?" He nodded. "Some listened. Others, too proud. They think courage alone can win against numbers and rifles." A faint bitterness edged his voice. "They don't see the weight stacked against them. The ones who did listen, we got them moving north, small groups traveling by dark." "Moving north in the dark," he explained. "Small bands slipping through at night, steering clear of towns and trails. Some might make it to Colorado, maybe link up with the northern bands where the fight's not as fierce." He glanced down at their joined hands. I got them as far as the high pass, then turned back. My road's somewhere else now. The quiet finality in his voice, the plain fact that he'd picked her over staying with his kin, filled Sophronia with a rush of gratitude and humble awe. She saw the full size of what he'd given up, the torn loyalties he walked between, blood ties, his own moral compass, and now her. He was trying to keep faith with all three without breaking any. I've got something to tell you, she said, heart pounding with a mix of nerves and joy. Something good. Itzachu's face softened, the shadows in his eyes lifting a little as he waited. She drew a steady breath, took his hand, and pressed it to her still flat belly where their child grew. We're going to have a baby, she said, voice firm even as tears threatened. A child of both our worlds. Wonder bloomed across Itzachu's features, followed by a raw, deep joy that chased away every lonely doubt she'd carried through the nights he was gone. He dropped to his knees before her, resting his forehead against the spot where his hand lay, murmuring soft Apache words that needed no translation to carry their meaning. When he looked up, his eyes shone with tears and fierce resolve. Now we have to choose, he said. The world won't hand this to us easy. Sophronia reached down, cupped his face, tracing the proud ridge of his cheekbone, the curve of lips that had shown her real desire for the first time. I've already chosen, she told him. My place is with you. Our child's place is with both of us. She nodded towards the cabin at their backs. This doesn't have to be our hideout forever. It can be our starting line. Itzachu rose, taking both her hands in his. There's a place, he said carefully, like he was sharing a guarded secret. South of here, near the border, a village where folks like us have put down roots. Apache, Mexican, white, mixed together, people who look past the lines others draw. His eyes searched hers, measuring her reaction. It would mean walking away from everything you've known. Sophronia thought of her folks in Cimarron, the life they'd always expected her to lead, the tight rules of respectability that had kept her cut off and unfulfilled. Then she thought of the freedom she'd tasted in Itzachu's arms, the strength she'd found while he was gone, the new life stirring inside her. You're everything I know now, she answered, the words carrying the weight of a vow spoken before any altar. You and our child. Itzachu's smile broke like the first warm wind after a hard winter, full of promise and fresh starts. Then when the thaw comes and the high passes clear, he said, voice thick with certainty, we head south. We start over together. As he spoke, the sun punched through the morning clouds, flooding the clearing with golden light. Sophronia looked up at the man who'd taught her how to really live, how to really love, and felt the old weight of loneliness finally slip from her shoulders. In its place rose a bright, unshakable certainty. Real love made its own rules, boundaries built to divide, could be crossed by hearts brave enough to see each other across the miles of culture and history. Sometimes the bravest thing a person could do was pick joy over fear, closeness over solitude, love over what folks said was proper. The next weeks filled with steady work getting ready to leave. Once the choice was made, Sophronia and Itzachu tackled it with clear heads and firm hands, sorting through the cabin's contents, deciding what to take, what to sell, what to leave behind for good. Hezekiah's leftover things, his clothes, old ledgers, the few personal bits he'd kept here, went into a trunk to be sent to his old partner in Cimarron. It was Sophronia's last duty to the man who'd once been her husband, the quiet closing of that chapter. Her own belongings forced harder choices. The wagon's limits meant picking practical over sentimental. Still, some things stayed non-negotiable. Her mother's quilt, the poetry books her father had given her, the journal that tracked her change from dutiful wife to a woman claiming her own road. When April rolled in with longer days and the first wildflowers breaking through the last snow patches, they turned to the journey itself. Itsachu patched up the small wagon Hezekiah had used for supply hauls, strengthening the frame, greasing the axles. Sophronia stitched hidden pockets into their clothes and bedrolls for the small stash of coins that would buy their fresh start. Their plan was careful and sharp. Travel by night when they could, steer wide of big settlements, show themselves when needed as a white widow heading south with her hired Apache guide to join family. Risky, sure, but with Itsachu's deep knowledge of the country and Sophronia's skill at moving through white circles when it mattered, they figured they had a real shot at reaching the border. One evening, they sat on the porch, watching the sunset turn the mountains gold and crimson. Sophronia's thoughts drifted to her folks. They'd grown distant over the miles, and her stubborn choice to stay on at the cabin after Hezekiah died. But they were still blood. Leaving without a word would cut that last tie to her old life. "I should write to them," she said, breaking the comfortable quiet. "My parents. Not to spell out everything, just to let them know I'm safe, that I've picked a different road." Itsachu thought it over, face thoughtful. "It would ease their minds," he agreed, "but it could stir trouble if they come looking." Sophronia sighed, knowing he was right. "I could have it sent after we've left," she offered. "Get a passerby through Cimarron to drop it off in a couple weeks." He nodded, wrapping her hand in his. "Your last kindness to them," he said. "Closes that door for good. Sets you free." The quiet understanding in his tone, the way he grasped the tangled feelings she carried for the family she was leaving, was one more sign of why this road called to her. Itsachu saw her clear, not as a daughter to steer, not as a wife to handle, but as a woman claiming her choices with eyes wide open to the fallout. That night, by flickering candle, Sophronia penned the letter. It was short, fuzzy on where she was headed, but straight on the heart. She was fine. She'd found new meaning. She'd always hold their love close while she built a life different from what they'd pictured for her. She asked for their grace, if not their full nod, and swore that one day, when the dust settled, she'd find a way to let them know she was doing more than just getting by. She was alive. Sealing the envelope, tears clouded her sight. Not regret, but the sharp knowing that every fresh start demanded hard goodbyes. That the trail she and Itsachu were cutting would ask tough trades from them both, snapping old bonds that couldn't be easily mended. But lifting her eyes to see him watching from across the room, dark gaze full of compassion for her hurt and rock-solid faith in what lay ahead. Sophronia knew deep down that what they were forging was worth every scar it left. The day they'd set to leave dawned bright and gentle, the sort of flawless spring morning made to tug at the heart of anyone pulling up stakes from a place grown dear. Sophronia paused in the cabin doorway, drinking in the view she'd known 100 times, but would never see again. The clearing where Itsachu had first appeared, the mountains that had trapped her and saved her in turns, the tiny garden patch where new green was just poking through the dirt she'd worked. "Ready?" Itsachu asked softly from behind, his hand settling warm on her shoulder. Sophronia laid hers over his, pulling strength from the touch. "Yes," she said, surprised to feel the truth of it ring clear. The spot held memories sweet and sour, but it was only wood and earth. What counted, what she carried forward, was the love that had reshaped her whole sense of living. With one final glance, she shut the door and turned to the loaded wagon waiting. The horse, borrowed from a trapper's shack Itsachu knew sat empty till fall, pawed the ground, restless in the crisp air, ready to pull. As they made final checks, Itsachu drew a small bundle from his pouch, sage and sweetgrass bound in red thread. He struck a match, letting the sweet smoke curl up in the still morning. "For safe trails," he explained, waving the smoldering herbs in slow circles around them, the wagon, the horse. "And thanks for what this ground gave us." The plain ritual, done with deep, quiet respect, brought tears to Sophronia's eyes. So unlike the grand church ceremonies of her upbringing, yet the same at the core, honoring powers bigger than them, asking grace for the road, giving thanks for what had been granted. When the bundle burned low, Itzachu helped her up to the wagon seat and climbed beside her. A light snap of the reins, and they rolled forward, the wagon creaking soft as it bumped down the path away from the clearing. Sophronia didn't glance back. Her eyes stayed on the trail stretching ahead, on the man at her side, on the future they were shaping mile by mile, choice by choice. As the trees closed around them, leaving the cabin behind, she felt no loss, just wild freedom. The heady rush of a life penned not by others' rules, but by the deepest call of her own heart. The ride south threw plenty of hurdles their way. Mountain spring weather turned on a dime, sunny warmth flipping to sudden blizzards that drove them into caves or empty miners' huts for cover. They crossed paths with other wanderers now and then, trappers, gold chasers, the odd army scout. Each time Sophronia slipped into the part of a widowed settler heading south, with her paid guide to kin, her swelling belly hidden under draped shawls and loose skirts. Itzachu's deep feel for the land saved them time and again, letting them skirt the main paths while finding ways the wagon could handle. Nights meant camp in hidden spots off the beaten trail, a shared fire crackling under star-thick skies, the thrill of their new life building like a gathering storm. In those hushed hours they dreamed aloud of what was coming. The home they'd raise, the lessons they'd pass to their child, the folks they hoped to find who'd chosen lives outside society's tight fences. Itzachu shared Apache tales on the duties of mothers and fathers, the holy gift of children from the Creator, the need to teach little ones to step light and true with the earth. Sophronia spoke of her dreams for the baby's learning, a mix of their ways, books and writing alongside the smart sense of living off the land. She'd hum the cradle songs her own ma had sung, hand on her rounding belly, as if the child inside could already catch the tune and know it. Those talks, stretching deep into the night under endless stars, locked in their picture of tomorrow, not wiping out what made them different, but honoring it all, weaving a fresh way that held both worlds while making one that was purely theirs. As they pushed farther south, the country shifted under them, tall mountain woods thinning to drier ground, wide desert stretches broken by green river bottoms where cottonwoods and willows stood like oases. The air warmed, nights shortened, the feel of leaving the known behind growing stronger with every mile. At last, after close to 3 weeks on the trail, they topped a ridge, and there it lay. A small village tucked in a river bend, adobe walls glowing gold in the late sun, corn and bean fields ringing the place, thin smoke from supper fires twisting up into the clear sky. Itzachu pulled the horse to a halt at the ridge top, giving them both time to take in the sight below. "Tres cruces," he said low, nodding toward the 3 weathered crosses standing sentinel on the hill beyond the houses. Named for those crosses, a spot for folks starting over, for refugees finding solid ground. Sophronia studied the little settlement spread out in the river valley, adobe walls catching the late afternoon gold, corn and bean fields ringing the place like a green belt, thin curls of supper smoke rising straight up into the clear sky. The buildings showed a patchwork of roots, some straight-up Mexican lines, others carrying Apache touches in the low roofs and earth colors, a few with plain Anglo angles mixed in. Even from up here she could make out people going about their day, hauling water, tending fires, kids darting between houses, A whole community moving as one. Differences that would have split them apart back in her old world smoothed over or simply ignored. "Will they take us in?" she asked, a nervous flutter kicking up in her chest. All their careful planning, every mile they'd covered, came down to this moment, stepping forward to face strangers whose welcome could make or break everything. Itsachu reached over and took her hand, his grip steady and warm. "These are people who've made the same hard calls we have," he said, "crossed lines others drew, built lives on their own terms. They know what it means to look for a place where love counts more than bloodlines or skin." His calm certainty steadied her, reminding her of every rough stretch they'd already beaten. She drew a deep breath, squeezed his hand back. "Then let's go home," she said. As they rolled down the slope toward the village, a deep sense of rightness settled over Sophronia like a warm blanket. This wasn't the tidy life she'd been raised to chase, not the narrow trail society had mapped out for a proper white woman in her time. Yet it was the one she'd picked with clear eyes and full heart. The future she was raising alongside the man who'd shown her what love could really mean. Whatever rough patches waited, and she held no illusions they'd be few. They'd meet them side by side. Two people from worlds built to stay apart, now making something fresh right where those worlds touched. As they neared the first low buildings, a handful of folks gathered to meet them. Men and women of mixed looks and dress, faces curious but not cold. Itsachu spoke first in quick Spanish, then Apache, then English, laying out who they were. Newcomers looking for a place to belong, to raise their child, to pitch in with a community that had already figured out how to live beyond the old divisions. An older woman stepped forward, sun-lined face, sharp eyes that took everything in without hurry, kindness tucked behind the assessment. She looked from Itsachu to Sophronia, noting their clasped hands, the way he edged the wagon slightly ahead like a shield, the quiet steel in Sophronia's gaze. "You've come a long way," she said in accented English, voice even, neither praising nor judging, just stating plain fact. "Yes," Sophronia answered, meeting her eyes straight. "But every mile was chosen." Something shifted in the woman's expression. Maybe recognition, maybe memory of her own hard road to this spot. She gave one firm nod, then swept a hand toward the village. "Welcome to Tres Cruces," she said, "a place for folks who pick their own trail." As they followed the small group into the heart of the settlement, Itsachu's hand stayed warm and sure in hers. Sophronia felt the last knot of doubt loosen and fall away. They hadn't reached an ending. They'd stepped into a beginning. The opening page of a story they'd write together, day after day, choice after choice. A story that had sparked with one act of kindness in a snowstorm and would stretch far past the limits of the life Sophronia once thought was all she could have. A story born, like the truest things always are, from love. New Mexico Territory, near the Mexican border, 1880. Evening air carried the sharp tang of piñon smoke and desert sage as Sophronia sat on the porch of their adobe house, watching the sun sink behind distant mountains in streaks of purple and molten gold. 5 years had slipped by since she and Itsachu left that lonely northern cabin, chasing a corner of the world where their love could breathe free from those who'd call it wrong. They'd put down roots here, in this small valley settlement just south of the line, neither fully Mexican nor American, a place where people of different blood and backgrounds had stitched together something new. A community rooted in mutual respect and plain survival, not the hard walls of race or flag. "Mama, look what I found." Sophronia turned to see her 4-year-old daughter Dulcibella Wren racing toward her, dark braids flying, small hands cupped around a treasure. Itsachu walked behind, their 1-year-old son, Lemuel Slate, perched high on his shoulders, giggling at the ride. The sight of them, her family, her heart out walking around in the world, flooded Sophronia with a joy so full it sometimes scared her with its size. "What did you dig up this time, little one?" she asked, as Dulcibella hit the porch steps, cheeks pink with excitement. The girl opened her hands to show a perfect eagle feather, clean and strong. "Papai says it's a blessing," she announced, face serious despite the breathless rush. "A sign the Great Spirit's watching over us." Sophronia met Itzachu's eyes over their daughter's head, sharing a quiet smile at the word eagle, the same symbol that had carried their promise through long separation and dark doubt. "Your papai's right," she said, pulling Dulcibella into a one-armed hug while reaching her other hand to Itzachu as he climbed the steps, Lemuel bouncing with delight up high. As the sun dipped below the horizon, stretching long shadows across their small but thriving spread, Sophronia let her mind drift back over the road that brought them here. It hadn't been smooth. Word of her choice had reached her folks. Her mother sent a careful letter last year, cracking the door open for some future mending. But for every hard mile, there'd been unexpected gifts. The open-armed welcome of this place, the little school where Sophronia now taught kids of every background and tongue. The steady respect Itzachu had earned as a tracker and hunter who helped keep them all safe in this still rough country. And above all, their children, Dulcibella, with Itzachu's dark eyes and Sophronia's stubborn spark, Lemuel already showing his father's quiet strength in his small, determined grip. "What treasure have you discovered today?" she asked, as Esperanza reached the porch steps, her face flushed with excitement. The little girl opened her hands to reveal a perfectly formed eagle feather. "Papai says it's a blessing," she announced, her expression solemn despite her breathlessness. "A sign that the Great Spirit watches over our family." Sophia met Baishan's eyes over their daughter's head, sharing a private smile at the memory that single word evoked. Eagle, the symbol that had carried their promise through separation and doubt. "Your papai is very wise," she said, pulling Esperanza into a one-armed embrace while reaching out her other hand to Baishan as he climbed the steps, their son giggling with delight at the height of his perch. As the sun slipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across their small but thriving homestead, Sophia reflected on the journey that had brought them here. It had not been easy. They learned of her choice, though her mother had secretly sent a letter last year, tentatively opening a door that might one day lead to reconciliation. But for every difficulty, there had been unexpected joys. The community that had welcomed them without question. The small school where Sophia now taught children of multiple heritages and languages, the respect Baishan had earned as a tracker and hunter who helped keep them all safe in this still wild territory. And most precious of all their children, Esperanza, with Baishan's dark eyes and Sophia's determined spirit. Thomas with his father's quiet strength, already evident in his infant determination. "What are you thinking?" Baishan asked, settling beside her on the bench, Thomas now contentedly playing with the wooden eagle carving that had traveled with them from the northern cabin. "I'm thinking about choices," Sophia replied, leaning against his shoulder, "about how the hardest ones often lead us exactly where we need to be." Baishan's arm encircled her waist, his touch as familiar and essential as her own heartbeat. "The mountain cannot tell the river where to flow," he said, using one of the Apache sayings that had become part of their family's private language. "It can only stand witness to the journey." Esperanza climbed into Sophia's lap, the eagle feather now tucked safely in her pocket. "Tell the story, Mama," she requested, her eyes bright with anticipation. The one about the snow and the wood. Sophia exchanged a smile with Baishan. It was their daughter's favorite bedtime tale. The story of how her parents had met, carefully edited for young ears, but preserving the essential truth of two people finding each other across divides meant to keep them apart. Once, Sophia began, her voice soft in the gathering twilight. There was a woman who lived alone in a cabin in the mountains. She thought she knew what her life would be, small and quiet and solitary, until one day when she couldn't split the wood she needed to keep warm. As she continued the familiar narrative, Baishan's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining in a gesture that had become their most constant form of communication. 5 years together had taught them that some bonds needed no words, that some connections transcended language and custom and history. Around them, the community prepared for night, lamps being lit in nearby homes, children being called in for supper, the distant sound of a guitar starting up for evening entertainment. Their world was small, perhaps, compared to the cities Sophia had once read about in her father's books, but it was rich in the things that truly mattered. Later, after the children were asleep, Sophia and Baishan stood together in the doorway of their home, looking up at the vast canopy of stars that seemed close enough to touch in the clear desert air. "Do you ever regret it?" Baishan asked quietly, the question one they revisited from time to time, an affirmation rather than a doubt, leaving everything you knew. Sophia turned to face the man who had taught her what love could be, patient and fierce, gentle and unyielding, a daily choice made with open eyes and full hearts. The years had added silver threads to his black hair, new lines around his eyes that spoke of both laughter and vigilance, in a world that was still not always kind to those who defied its categories. "I didn't leave everything," she corrected him, raising her hand to touch the eagle feather that still hung at his temple, now bound with threads of their children's hair alongside her own. "I brought the only things that mattered." Baishan's smile, still rare enough to feel like a gift each time, transformed his face. He drew her into his arms, his forehead coming to rest against hers in the gesture that had become their most intimate form of connection. 5 years, he murmured, his breath warm against her skin. "And still every morning I wake surprised by joy." 5 years, Sophia echoed, her arms encircling his waist, anchoring herself to this man who had shown her a way of being in the world she would never have found alone. And a lifetime still to come. Inside their home, their children slept peacefully, secure in the knowledge that they were loved beyond measure. Outside, the desert night enfolded them in quiet darkness, a vastness that reminded them of how small human divisions truly were against the backdrop of mountains and stars that had witnessed centuries of such boundaries being drawn and occasionally transcended by those brave enough to choose love. As Baishan led her back inside to the warmth of the home they had built together, Sophia felt gratitude fill her heart, like water in a desert, a Rolo after rain, sudden, powerful, life-giving. For the woman who had once believed that duty and loneliness were all she could expect from life had discovered a truth both simple and revolutionary, that love, when founded on respect and choice rather than obligation, could create worlds where none had existed before, that crossing boundaries with an open heart could lead not to loss, but to unexpected abundance, that sometimes the most profound act of courage was simply to recognize one's own capacity for happiness and to claim it without apology. In the soft darkness of their bedroom, Sophia and Baishan renewed the promises they had first made in a snowbound cabin 5 years before, promises that had withstood separation, prejudice, and the countless daily challenges of forging a life together against all odds. Promises that would continue to sustain them through whatever joys and sorrows the future might hold, for they had learned the most essential lesson of all, that love, true love, was neither a luxury nor a weakness, but the very foundation upon which a meaningful life must be built. And having founded in each other against all probability, they would never take for granted the miracle of two paths converging to become one journey, shared with open eyes and grateful hearts. A journey that had begun with a simple act of kindness during a snowstorm and would continue day by day and choice by choice for all the days they were granted together beneath the vast New Mexico sky. Lemuel Slate already showing his daddy's steady, quiet power in the determined grip of his tiny hands. "What's on your mind?" Itsachu asked, easing down beside her on the porch bench. Lemuel sat happily in his lap now, chubby fingers turning the wooden eagle carving over and over, the same one that had ridden with them all the way from that northern cabin. Sophronia leaned into his shoulder, breathing him in. "Choices," she said. "How the toughest ones usually land us right where we're supposed to stand." Itsachu wrapped an arm around her waist, the touch as natural and necessary as her own heartbeat. "The mountain never tells the river which way to run," he said, pulling from one of the old Apache sayings that had woven themselves into their family's private language. "It just watches the water find its course." Dulcibella Wren climbed up into Sophronia's lap, the eagle feather now tucked safe in her pocket. "Tell the story, Mama," she begged, eyes shining bright in the fading light. "The one about the snow and the wood." Sophronia traded a soft smile with Itsachu. It was their girl's favorite bedtime tale, the carefully softened story of how her parents first met, keeping the heart of it true. Two people finding each other across lines, meant to hold them apart forever. "Once," Sophronia began, her voice gentle as twilight settled, "there was a woman living all by herself in a cabin high in the mountains. She figured she knew exactly what her days would look like. Small, quiet, alone. Then one winter day she couldn't split the wood she needed to stay warm." As the familiar words flowed, Itsachu's hand found hers, their fingers laced together in the easy way that had become their most constant language. 5 years had taught them some ties didn't need talking. Some connections ran deeper than words, deeper than custom, deeper than history. Around them, the little community readied for night, lamps flickering to life in nearby windows, children called in for supper, the far-off strum of a guitar drifting on the cooling air. Their world might look small next to the big cities Sophronia once read about in her father's books, but it overflowed with the things that truly counted. Later, after the children were tucked in and sleeping sound, Sophronia and Itsachu stood together in the open doorway, gazing up at the thick blanket of stars that felt close enough to reach in the clear desert night. "You ever wish you'd turned back?" Itsachu asked quietly. It was a question they circled back to now and then. Not doubt, just a gentle check-in. "Left everything you knew?" Sophronia turned to face the man who'd shown her what love could be. Patient and fierce, gentle and unbreakable. A daily choice made with wide-open eyes and full hearts. The years had threaded silver through his black hair, etched new lines around his eyes from both laughter and watchfulness, in a world that still didn't always treat folks who broke the rules kindly. "I didn't leave everything," she corrected softly, lifting her hand to touch the eagle feather still tied at his temple, now woven with strands of their children's hair alongside her own. "I carried the only things that ever really mattered." Itsachu's smile, still rare enough to feel like a gift every single time, lit his whole face. He drew her close, resting his forehead against hers in the gesture that had become their truest way of speaking. 5 years, he murmured, breath warm on her skin. "And every morning I still wake up surprised by the joy." 5 years, Sophronia echoed, arms sliding around his waist, anchoring herself to the man who'd shown her a way of living she'd never have found on her own, and a whole lifetime still waiting. Inside their home, the children slept peacefully, wrapped in the sure knowledge they were loved beyond measure. Outside, the desert night folded around them in quiet dark, its vastness reminding them how small human walls really were against mountains and stars that had watched centuries of boundaries drawn, and sometimes crossed by hearts brave enough to choose love. As Itsachu led her back inside to the warmth of the home they'd built together, Gratitude flooded Sophronia's heart like sudden rain in the desert. Swift, powerful, life-giving. The woman who once thought duty and loneliness were all life held had discovered a truth both plain and earth-shaking. Love built on respect and free choice instead of duty could raise whole worlds from nothing. Crossing lines with an open heart didn't have to mean loss. It could mean unexpected plenty. And sometimes the bravest thing anyone could do was simply see their own chance at happiness and claim it without apology. In the soft dark of their bedroom, Sophronia and Itza-Chu renewed the promises first spoken in that snow-trapped cabin 5 years earlier. Promises that had held fast through separation, hard stares, and the 1,000 daily fights of building a life against the odds. Promises that would carry them through whatever joys and sorrows waited ahead. They had learned the deepest truth of all. True love wasn't a luxury or a soft spot. It was the bedrock any life worth living had to stand on. And having found it in each other against every chance, they would never treat the miracle lightly. The wonder of two separate trails meeting to become one shared road, walked with clear eyes and thankful hearts. A road that began with one act of kindness in a winter storm and would keep unfolding, day after day, choice after choice, for every day the vast New Mexico sky granted them together. Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. Thank you for being here and letting this story live within your heart. If it moved you, I hope you'll walk beside us through more journeys of the Wild West, stories filled with truth, endurance, and grace. Subscribe, share your thoughts, and stay close. Together we'll keep riding across these wide-open lands of memory and hope. Thank you. Aviso Legal Barra Disclaimer. Our narratives bring inspiration from the past, recreated with fictional and dramatized interpretations for entertainment purposes only. iTools serve as creative support, but the storytelling, editing, and emotional refinement are handled by our team to guarantee authenticity. We comply with content policies for AI use, avoiding impersonations, identity fabrication, or historically misleading images. All visual and audio content is legally sourced. Redistribution or modification requires prior written approval. Thank you for honoring creativity, collaboration, and storytelling done with heart.